Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege to invite Mr. M.J. Akbar, former Minister of State for External Affairs, to deliver the commemorative address.
Thank you very much, Admiral Chauhan. Thank you very much, Indo. Just going by the remarks that have already been made. If you want to begin to understand how dynamic the world has become, all you have to do is to see how fast the world has changed from the time this conference was conceived and the time that it is actually happening. There are many things which are not going to be mentioned, but judging by the political transformation of the East, I may be bold enough to say, without elaboration, that for the first time in memory, we might be able to create the strategic architecture of security in the East impediment, but without much impediment. We are meeting on the morning when President Trump has reached Beijing. And this, I'm referring to you because this is going to be the theme of my presentation. That what we are witnessing already, which you hinted at, is the war of the 5 seas searching for a 6th. And just to add a little to your thought process before we continue, don't think of Ukraine as a land alone. Ukraine began with Crimea in 2014. President Trump began the war in Hormuz on certain assumptions. When I think this trip to Beijing was planned, which was planned for March, he expected to reach Beijing with Venezuela in one pocket and Iran in the other. Instead, he is landing there as a supplement. He may have said that he doesn't want China to intervene in Iran, but he also added that he would like China to become active. And then Marco Rubio made what was very clear. He said China should play a role in resolving the war. Just before he left, his officials told the US Congress that 30 of the 33 Iranian missile launch pads were still perfectly safe, that the war had at a very minimum cost the Americans $29 trillion. He did not add that 13 American bases in the region had been destroyed, and so on and so forth. I don't need to elaborate. These facts are known. But let me tell you a fact which may have escaped your attention. And this brings me to the point, because I think Admiral Chauhan, you said that we look at the seas from many different angles. Let me point out that my worry is different. My worry is that the seas are invisible when it comes to strategic planning. Nobody sees the seas. Nobody sees Crimea. They all look at the Kiev. What is this war about? This is the first declared war for oil and water, because oil is impotent without water. Trade is prohibitive without water. And when I talk of invisibility, I'm going to refer you to the interview which you probably must have come across. It was an interview given by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to an American channel, in which he said something which I think has escaped everyone's attention, but which utterly startled me. He said that when the war began, they means Israel and America, never factored in that Iran might use Hormuz as a strategic weapon. And I wondered, how could you not factor that? How could you possibly not factor that? Today, we are equally invisible to the Malacca Straits. The shadow of Hormuz is already on Malacca. And while it may not have become a hot war, the Taiwan Straits are waiting to explode. And this conflict is going to take dimensions which we have not yet begun to fully recognize. The war in Iran, the war against Iran, America's war against Iran, did not start on 20th February this year. It started in 1979. It started in 79 because in 79 two major events happened in 1979 which persuade me to believe that the start of the 21st century is actually 1979. First, after the big American strategic success, otherwise known as Camp David, in which America neutralized the Soviet influence in the region, in the Gulf, it brought Egypt, which was the major military power at the time and still is, although it has become a dormant power, it had brought Anwar Sadat's Egypt into the American fold. For the first time, the oil flows, the energy flows, and then the energy pricing through OPEC of that whole region was under American control. Influence, if you don't like the word control. But it was certainly part of America's view of how the world should be run, and particularly how energy should be run. The sudden rise of the Islamic Republic in 1979 took everyone by surprise. But the second surprise was that the Iranian Revolution succeeded in its first year in establishing a government when it could easily have been destroyed by the many other players within the revolution. But they survived that. Imam Khomeini established a government, and then the government began to function. Then the government took Americans hostage. The government was hyped up. The challenge to America in the name of oil pricing, among other things. This 1979 movement, the first war for regime change. You keep hearing of regime change. I sometimes wonder if the regime will change in Tel Aviv and Washington before it changes in Tehran. But that's another story. The first attempt at regime change took place in 1980, and it was done through Saddam Hussein. In 1980, Iraq attacked with the coordinated help of the Americans and the financing of the Saudis. That war continued for 8 years. Iran did not have an army then, because the Shah's army had withered. But they showed a resilience which people seem to forget. They showed an ability. In fact, Ayatollah Khamenei, who was assassinated, first earned his spurs fighting in the trenches of that war. That war took 8 years, and it ended with the return of the status quo ante, as we say. This one will also end up there, status quo. Whereas the Iranians put it in Hormuz, it is either free for everyone or free for no one. In 1979, also to give you a parallel story, the Soviets made their historic mistake, historic blunder when they invaded Afghanistan. The consequences of that are a different story, not part of this seminar, but that ended the Soviet Union, leading to consequences which had a major play on our subcontinent, because the American need for Pakistan was renewed because of that invasion, and that gave wind to Pakistan's generals to renew their war against India, this time through terrorism. But before I go back to my subject, I would like to remind you of of a statement made by Mrs. Margaret Thatcher. This was made in 1981 when Israel actually, despite the alliance with Iraq, Israel used that environment to bomb Osiris, which was Iraq's nuclear facility, once again under the pretext of destroying any potential weapons of mass destruction. And I think a lady who can be now considered one of the wisest conservative voices of the past half century, Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, told the Jewish Chronicle, and seeking the Jewish Chronicle to say this is itself significant. She said on the Israel attack that if you destroy the international rules-based order, you will get international anarchy. And we are heading towards that, but not preparing for it. Or not, we were not, we are now. And I'll come to that later. Which are the 5 C's? If you change the perspective of the Ukraine war, the 5 C's that are actively engaged in war at the moment are the Mediterranean, the Black Sea. These are lands of the Mediterranean. The Black Sea, Caspian, which is Iran, Red Sea, which is Houthis, Aden. Don't forget the most dangerous strait is not Hormuz. The most dangerous strait is Bab-el-Mandeb, the Gate of Tears. It's called Gate of Tears because for centuries people have died there. It's on the Horn of Africa. It's in Yemen. That is the key region. The war has not even reached it. When it does, wait and prepare for energy prices and austerity of $200 and $300. So, the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea. If you think that the lands of the Arabian Sea, and look at the literal states of the region. Don't think of war only as what is in the headlines. On 11th of May this year, which is how many days before, how many of you are aware that Jordan bombed Syria? Boundaries are gone. It may be now slipping in the back of your consciousness that now Pakistan has made bombing Afghanistan a regular feature and Afghanistan is responding. So there is active war going on there. I'm just telling you about the range of conflict which has already happened. It's not waiting to happen. Sri Lanka will tell you that a ship was destroyed on its shores. So how long do you have, where do you have to wait for the war to come to the Indian Ocean? The Indian Navy, as I tell you, is patrolling on the Red Sea. Why? Because for the first time, we have moved away. This is the strength of what has not yet been called, but what will eventually, I think, be called the Modi Doctrine, which is that for the first time, I think, since whenever, to say that also becomes controversial, so I won't say it. But for the first time, we are now have a forward security strategy. For a long while, India's security was trapped in a very British doctrine, first articulated by John Lawrence, Governor General after 1857, when the Russian expansion in Central Asia mounted. And from, I think, 1864 to 1879, this was the policy of the British. It was known as masterly inactivity. Whenever you don't want to do anything, just add masterly to it and it will look sufficiently. For a long while, I'm afraid, the government of India's bureaucracy believed in masterly inactivity as its preferred policy. And its political class thought that was the wisest way forward because it saved you on budget, gave you funds for doing other things. But this masterly inactivity has happened. we are not only developing the Nicobar case, which I think is well known, certainly to this room. We are developing it because Malacca can be our Hormuz if we have the sufficient strength to provide the security at the western gates of the Malacca. Indonesia can be the equivalent of Oman out there, and we can work in cooperation to maintain the right of free passage. And in fact, those who are attacking our base in Nicobar, I consider them to be seriously even anti-national. This has also happened because Prime Minister Modi has changed the meaning of neighbor. For a long while, India's policy was trapped to the west by Pakistan. Became imbued for a long while. We were trapped in the Himalayas by our needs, legitimate needs, to protect ourselves against China. And then, of course, the conflicts that Pakistan has started from 1956. But the meaning of neighbor was changed. I think Bajpayee ji said, and he said something which I think all of us consider to be common sense, which is that you can change friends, but you can't change neighbors. It's a sort of given assumption. Prime Minister Modi actually proved you can change neighbors. How can you change neighbors? By redefining them. You no longer define neighbors by geography, you define them by reach. If I can't reach you, you are not my neighbor. Just look at it like a Bombay high-rise. Who knows the name of the next door neighbor? In a village, everybody knows. Because you can reach them. So if we can't reach Pakistan, Pakistan is not a neighbor. It is just a problem and a presence. Who is our neighbor? Very simple. Every week there are 1,000 flights to the Gulf. You can't get a ticket. Right? There is no flight to Pakistan. And if there was, you could get a ticket. So who is my neighbor? Nothing to do with Muslim and Hindu. The Gulf is Muslim. Who is man? I was in Malaysia recently, and I was shocked, surprised to find that there's a Malaysian airline which has a flight to every virtually semi-small town, huge town, some 30 towns across the country. So who is my neighbor? Malaysia? Or this Western presence? Once we change the arc of neighborhood, our neighborhood now, in both real terms and strategic terms, extends from Hormuz and the Gulf up to Malacca. That is the arc of India's neighborhood, and that is the arc, perimeter of India's immediate defense, priority and security line. I think it's no longer forward, it's the real active security line. And once we were able to do it, we have now become what people have always forgotten, and I urge our friends in the Navy to mention this as often as possible. One of the oldest sayings, descriptions of India, is that India is not only the land south of the mountains, it is the land north of the waters. And for the first time now, we are beginning to implement a policy which is based on India being land north of the waters. Just remember one thing. Why is the Indian Ocean called the Indian Ocean? And this is not a name which has been invented in the last 10 years. It's called the Indian Ocean because of India's predominant place in these waters historically from the most ancient times. Why did the British in 1772 in their maps say Bay of Bengal, which is what we are discussing? Because Bengal was the source. The trade from Bengal made the waters of Bay of Bengal into a strategic asset. Murshidabad was once one of the richest cities of the country, if not the richest city of the country. The British were in, Kutch for a long while and Surat for a long while. Then they discovered that the place to be in was Bengal for trade and commerce, not elsewhere. So this resurgence of India's sense of itself, this resurgence of India's understanding of itself, this resurgence of India's understanding that the Nicobar is only 100 kilometers or so away from the western gate of Malacca. Otherwise, Andamans and Nicobar were not even within our, geographical sense of ourselves, consciousness of ourselves. These are very remarkable changes. And remember that the search for the sixth sea is because the sixth sea, right, going right up to the China Sea, is volatile. China has already set a calendar for the absorption, if you like, of Taiwan, which will fundamentally change not only the geopolitics, but it will change the economics of the region, and that is a conflict from which Japan cannot be excluded. Japan has already begun arming itself, which is a fact which may have escaped your notice, and it has done so after the Iran war. 80% of China's energy imports go through the Malacca. So China is not quiet as it watches us strengthen itself in the region. And in fact, those who are raising voices against our strength in that region fear that suspicions are arising about their motives. The nature of war itself has changed dramatically. In fact, mention of Taiwan reminds me that 1958 Taiwan crisis was the first time or second time that the America and NATO diverged from each other. The first time was Suez. The second time was during the Taiwan crisis, when Macmillan told Eisenhower openly that Europe was not ready for a world war. Europe had in many cases ravished by them. And the cost of invasion was unacceptable to trade. That thing is still here. Almost the cost of invasion is unacceptable to the trade. In fact, some of the Chinese doctrines of the time are becoming very, very relevant now. Some of the Mao's theories of war I'm just mentioning it to you so that you might think about it. That at that moment China was desperate to get attention because it was not recognized. So he set off this maximum, fire a few cannon in order to get their attention. It's draw the bow, don't discharge the arrow. That's what Iran has done extremely successfully, choosing which arrow to use at which point. The Mao Noose strategy is something again. But the most important thing is the Chinese doctrine, which I think you will see. Zheng, Junxi, Jiang, fighting and talking go together. And this is what you will see develop because this war is unlikely to end. The nature of war has changed from continuous to continual. War will see pauses. I think whatever pause you will see after whichever negotiations take place, you will see re-emergence of some form of conflict before too soon. In fact, if they had understood, if the Americans had understood the meaning of water, on 20th October morning when they attacked Tehran, they would have simply sent 3,000 troops and taken over Khalid Island, which was undefended at that time. Right? Because they could not see water, I think they missed the chance of war will continue under what fluid lines, protracted war. Countries will use strategies of secession, retreat, attack, it will be very, very unconventional. And the challenge before us strategic thinkers is how to deal with the unconventional. Just before I end, I may link up the land and sea and why we are facing, after the 20th century's world wars, why we are facing a worldwide war rather than a world war. Ukraine from Eurasia. How far is Chechnya from Ukraine? And don't think that the Chechnya was has finished. It's Delhi and Haryana, not more than that. How far is Chechnya from Caucasus? You don't need a lesson of how disturbed Caucasus is. How is Caucasus from the Kurds and Erbil? How far is Erbil from Iraq? It's probably technically a part of Iraq. And ISIS, how far is that from Syria, where everyone is fighting? Nobody quite knows who's fighting. Then Syria to Lebanon, Lebanon to Palestine, Palestine, Israel, Yemen, Pakistan, Afghanistan. God forbid Pakistan becomes adventurous again and tempts the Indian frontiers of Kashmir. We don't know. Last year they did Sindhu, right? And right up to these, across these troubled waters, up to Taiwan. And you're looking at a time of extreme danger, extreme caution, and a time when the leaders of the world must also understand that they are living in the space between the death of one world, the world that was created in 1946, based on the sovereignty of nations as the building block of the architecture of security, to that world is dead. And it is dead because the guardians of security have become marauders. The United Security Council has members who are no longer respect sovereignty. That world is dead. The next is not born. We are trapped in between. And in this violent trap, we have to use the word which I'm sure admirals would like, navigate through sharks and shoals. Thank you.
May I now request Admiral Chauhan to present a token of our appreciation to Mr. M.J. Akbar.
You know, sir, you have so eloquently painted the picture of the geopolitical arena in which we must navigate. And what better symbol can I offer you than a lifebuoy?
Ma'am,